Today we are here to talk to Jeanne Johnson.
Looking around and saying, what can we bridge to make them not say Jesus is the foreigner's God, but He's our God.
Welcome to Heritage of Truth. My name is Karen Whiting, and I am your host today, substituting for Jeanne Dennis. I have authored several books myself, but today we are here to talk to Jeanne Johnson. And she's a missionary where she did not plan to be a missionary. In fact, the missions and Jesus found her rather than her finding them. But she has a book that is called We Are Not the Hero. And that really speaks to the heart of, as if we go elsewhere in the world as Americans, it's not America that's the hero. We are not there to do that. We are simply there as a tool for Christ. And in fact, we should just be discipling others to help them disciple others. And that should be the chain of command from Christ for all of us, I believe. Mm-hmm. So, Jeanne, I'm so happy to have you here. Can you tell us a little bit about how missions came after you?
Okay, absolutely. I don't know how much people know about Cambodia, but in the late 70s, right during the exact time around the Vietnam War, Cambodia experienced a genocide. And it's not the typical genocide where it's like an ethnic cleansing. It was actually Cambodians who were killing Cambodians. Mm. And during that time, they killed about 3 million people. Their goal was to turn the country back to the year zero. So they systematically started by enslaving the entire country and then torturing and killing anybody who would be considered year one or year two or year three, meaning any kind of modern influence. So they started at the level of the government and began to execute and kill them, and then it went down to doctors and nurses, and then it went down to lawyers and civil servants, and then all the way down to if they just handed you a book and you knew how to read, they would torture and kill you. They turned your hands over and they were soft, they tortured and killed you. If you wore glasses, they tortured and killed you, and they just kept systematically getting rid of their entire population. And not only did they reduce life from everything from every person in the country to 2 pairs of clothes.
So that's what they were doing. And what brought you to Cambodia the first
so
time?
Those Cambodians escaped the country and became refugees. And so when I was in high school, that was the time that I was just coming to know the Lord Jesus Christ. And the Cambodians came into my high school, and as they were walking down the hall, all of my friends made fun of them and said, "Oh, look, they have flip-flops on in the middle of winter." And something was going on in my heart differently, and I said, "Who are these people? What is their story?" And so I began to ask their story, and that's when I heard of Cambodia. And that's when I felt, okay, who tells people groups from other countries, especially if this group was a Buddhist country, Buddhist people, who tells them, who crosses into the culture and makes the gospel relevant? Well, I found out that's a very dangerous question to ask God. Who does? And that's when God began to stir into my heart.
And then He says, you do it.
You do it, exactly.
I put that question in your heart because to find the answer, you would become it.
I would become it. So that was my beginning of my journey towards going to Cambodia.
And did you go to Cambodia in high school or not till afterwards?
Not till after. When I graduated from college, I found an 8-member Cambodian family living in a 1-bedroom house in Minneapolis, and asked if I could make the 9th member of that family, and moved in with that Cambodian family, began learning the language and the culture, and started a Cambodian church for Cambodians in St. Paul, Minneapolis. I spent 6 years living among Cambodians. 1992, I was off to Cambodia. So I would have been in my late 20s.
In college, that was already on your heart in many ways because your degree was even cross-cultural communications, where you wanted to communicate with people. And I think God even must have put on your heart as you saw those Cambodians walking down the hallway being teased that you wanted to communicate on a heart level with them.
Yeah, I believe that's true. It is interesting because when I was in high school, I was persecuted. So they started to call me the Asian lover. And so I severed my relationships with Cambodians for a season.
Oh.
So then when I went into Bible college. I had no intention it wasn't on my radar yet what missions is all about, so God had to bridge those pieces. So I remember one evening in Bible college praying, God, I'm becoming spiritually obese, meaning I'm taking in the Bible constantly, but I'm not putting it out there. So I prayed and I said, God, is there something I can do with my life to pour it back out? And that was the very next morning. A college mate came up and said, how would you like to be involved in a ministry? And I said, well, what is it? And he said, working with Cambodian youth. And I felt like God was coming back around and saying, are you ready now? Right. And that's when I changed my major into missions to adequately prepare and intentionally prepare.
And then you work with a large mission organization, World Mission Associates, is that right? Or
yeah,
you have another one now?
I'm with World Mission Associates.
Okay.
I wouldn't call it large, but it's,
right.
yeah.
Well, it's large scale because it goes around the world.
Right, absolutely.
Even if it's a few people, God often only has those few workers.
Yes. I'm with World Mission Associates.
Okay, and so you don't just work with Cambodia anymore?
No, I left Cambodia after being there for 16 years in 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And my journey was a learning curve. Even though I had a lot of the culture and language for 6 years, it was still being in the country of Cambodia, I had a learning curve. And over the 16 years, I had these aha moments with God. Aha moments about how I was planting churches. And so I had aha moments along the way of how to plant churches in a way that those, as a missionary, I make the first disciples. But how do I make the first disciples in such a way that those first handful of disciples make disciples in their own country?
And of course that's to produce a reproducible ministry, that it will go on, and you're not the key person. They don't always need a Westerner to come in. They don't need someone from America. They start being their own thriving ministry.
Exactly. Hence we are not the hero, because a lot of times as missionaries we it isn't that our intentions aren't to do that, but with me it was a degree of what I would call unintended consequences. So the means I used to reach my goal actually became the stumbling block to the fulfillment of that goal.
So how do you make it reproducible? What are some of the key ingredients anyone going out to another country would need to think about?
Okay. I think the two things that are very important for me is when I began my church planning ministry, I conceptualized and organized the church based on my church experience and my culture from America and the money that I could bring in. So in the beginning, it's kind of like the Cambodians are in a position, well, we can't do it like that, or we
don't have that money.
We don't have that money.
We don't even understand your church.
Right, we can't afford that. And so our tendency is, that's okay. I'll fill in for now. I'll pay for this. I'll pay for that. And thinking that later they'll take the responsibility. But that later doesn't come. So the idea is how, I think, if I were to answer your question and summarize it, would be the idea to plant the gospel, but allow the expression of their faith, the forms and the structures and the manners and the methods, to allow that to rise up from them. So make disciples, but let those disciples determine how is the flavor of their culture going to influence how they worship, how they pray, how they evangelize.
And that can bring in their cultural background of how they like to celebrate, because when they have church, it's celebrating God, and should be that. How they like to learn, because then that's how they can do their own digging into the Word, or bring up their own preachers that can preach to them then.
Absolutely.
Okay.
One of my aha moments was I had planted a particular church, and it was self-sustaining in the sense that the pastor had their own leadership in that, but I had left and come back. I came back for a visit, and I was sitting in the Cambodian church, and everybody was worshiping, and I looked over and I saw a Cambodian man worshiping different than everybody else. So I was really curious, and so I intently leaned over and looked to see why, and I noticed that he was a blind man. And he was worshiping the innate, organic way that Cambodians would show respect, which is not to look in the eyes of God, to be bowed down, no shoes on. While the rest of the church was worshiping in our typical American way, eye contact with God, maybe arms raised up. And that aha moment showed me that I'd given him the function of worship, wrapped in the form of American culture.
Right.
And so I, in the middle of my missions experience, began to turn and do things differently. And that's what my book is about.
And were those people then much happier? Did they seem to relate to God better because they learned to worship with their own way of honoring people, and they could then honor God without their shoes on? And
Absolutely. The love relationship was more natural. But secondly, Cambodians who were non-believers looking in, the number one barrier to the gospel is Jesus is the foreigner's God. So the more their Christian experience looks foreign, the more it drives away non-believing Cambodians.
so then it starts to look like what they recognize, and
Exactly.
they can relate to
Yes.
Jesus as someone who knows who Cambodians are, or in any other country, what their culture is. That is just wonderful. Now, one of the things you do is you say keep a low profile with questions rather than answers. Can you give us some examples of that?
Yeah, for example, when Cambodians are planning something, like they're planning an event, our tendency, when they ask us advice, our tendency is to say, do this, do that, to inform them. And it's almost inevitable that when we inform people as communicators, we inform them out of our default, our worldview. And asking questions, it kind of goes back to the form and function. For example, if there's discovering worship in the Bible, my tendency used to be, well, let me model for you how to worship. But now I use questions. I have actually wanted to write a book called How to Plant Churches with Questions. But the question would be, going back to worship, how do you revere people that you consider important in your culture? How would you want to revere God? And so the questions lead and facilitate them to find their own answers. There's a Chinese proverb that says, tell me I forget, show me I remember, involve me I understand, help me discover it, I use it. So questions help people discover. And then when they discover, they have the psychological ownership.
Which is a great thing. You know, and I think you're really looking at the title of the book is good, but the picture in here, we have patriotic socks, American flag socks in cowboy boots. And they often see us as this foreigner bringing their flag and their country as though they want to take over our country spiritually, and that's not what we want to do. So that's really good to remember them. We are not the hero.
I like to use the phrase local champions.
The local champions,
instead
great.
of going over as heroes, let's facilitate and make disciples who become the local champions in their own context.
Right, and discover them. How do you go about when you're in an area finding that person or those people who are going to be the local champions?
How do I find the local champions?
How do you find them? Does God point them out to you? Do you start talking and all of a sudden is it the ones who ask you more questions or who respond? What is it?
I think it's just, you just take any story out of the Bible. Let's say David and Saul. Okay. Saul recognized something in David. There's a passion. David was passionate. He shepherded sheep, so he was good at what he did. It isn't about inviting people into ministry to make them into local champions. It's looking at people, what are they already doing good in their context? So like David, he was a shepherd, and he took care of his sheep in a way that affected the heart of God, I believe. So it's finding people in their own context and watching them move and have their being and interacting with people.
Seeing those qualities, the integrity, the virtues in them.
The virtues in them that they're already just organic in their own culture. So it's
right. And I want you to do that, because Jesus has commanded us to make disciples, and what you really want to do is disciple them so they can disciple the next person. What are some of the steps you take in doing that?
The key to me is reproducibility. I don't think you can separate. If you want multiplication, you need reproducibility. So let me give you an example. When I was first in Cambodia, I'm a church planner, so I go into areas that are unreached, and I use, let's say I'm picking out an evangelism method, and I think, the Jesus movie. And a lot of people like the Jesus movie. It's translated into Cambodian, or dubbed in, I should say. And so I decide I'm going to use the Jesus movie in this particular village. Now keep in mind there's people along the side that are going with me. And I can't just think about the method or the event. I need to think about the people that I'm training and discipling and what they're seeing. So what happens if I use the Jesus movie, they don't have electricity in the village, so then I'll need a generator. For the generator, I'm going to need a truck to move the generator. I'm going to need fuel. I'm going to need the film projector and expertise how to run it. So now I'm up to like, maybe $1,000 to move this whole thing.
Right.
And I go into a village, and it works, and people are interested. It sparks their interest in Christ. But down the road, when it's time for those disciples I'm making to reach another village,
They don't have those tools.
They don't have those tools, and they inevitably say two things. Okay, it's our turn. What should we do? Well, we can't do it like Jeanne did it, so we're not good enough. We don't have enough money, so they either give up and say, let the outsiders do it, the heroes, or B, they come back around and ask me to help them, and then I've created a chain of dependency. So making disciples, a lot of it has to do connecting modeling with reproducibility, which leads to multiplying.
So instead you want to come and look around and see what they have that you can use, maybe their crafts, their ability, paper and scissor stories or something else that you can do with them. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
And
Cambodians are avid storytellers. They sing songs. They'll sing songs to one another. So those are how I make disciples. I grab a hold of what's already, the communication methods. It's an oral culture. They're not into books.
yeah. Well, and we see that. Paul went to the hill in Mars and he found a statue to the unknown God that he used.
Correct.
St. Patrick went to Ireland and picked up the shamrock to use it. So you're going into these villages and finding what they have, or picking up on a song that already talks about love or integrity or something, and using that to bridge into Christ. Is that the
it's
concept?
walking the marketplace like Paul and looking for things that are already in the culture. Paul used their poetry. Paul used their religious paraphernalia. So it's looking around and saying, what can we bridge to make them not say Jesus is the foreigner's God, but he's our God.
Right, and so Cambodia now is probably very successfully reproducing the ministry throughout the country. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, they're getting there. There's a lot of, the reason I wrote the book is because there is a lot of unhealthy dependency. Cambodia just opened up in 1992, and kind of the gist of my book is to help us missionaries, or anyone who does missions, to relook at our paradigms and make sure.
Well, thank you so much. And where can people get your book? Is it at the Christian stores? Where is it?
Yeah, you can get the book at wearenotthehero.com or my website, or you can get it through Amazon and whatnot. So
right, and CBD.com. I imagine all of and many of the Christian bookstores now have their own website.
They do.
They can get that.
Yes, absolutely.
So it's really great to have that. But just remember this title: We Are Not the Hero. If you've got a teen going on a mission trip, if you're going on a short-term mission trip, read this before you go, so you understand the mindset that Christ wants you to have. And we just really thank you, Jeanne Johnson, for coming on and doing this with us. I'm so glad that you're teaching us to find that local champion wherever you go and raise up these reproducible ministries. So again, the website is
wearenotthehero.com.
Not plural there. We are not the hero.
We are not the hero.
.com.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much,
Thank
Jeanne.
you so much.